Hello my dear friends, you're on the Military Summary channel, and today we will discuss the situation in Ukraine on the 21st of January of 2024. Today we have a lots of very interesting updates, so let's start. And first we're going to talk about Kupiansk direction. We have a lot of details, a lot of videos, a lot of geolocations, and according to information we have, the Ukrainians continue destroying the bridges along the Oskol River. The sources are saying that this is the bridge that was destroyed somewhere in Kupiansk direction, but according to geosync sources, this the bridge that was destroyed in the vicinity of the village by the name of Kamyanka, so almost on the border with Russian Federation. So probably if the Russians are planning to start any offensive operation in Kupiansk, one of the possible direction is to attack, let's say, from behind. So that's why this is not a surprise for us if the Ukrainians start bombing and destroying their own bridges along the Oskol River. Now we are moving to the Kislovka-Kotlarovka, Pershatravneva, to this triangle. The Russians start using Ka-52 massively. If when talking about the Ka-52, these helicopters, the last time we saw such a massive use of this type of weapon took place somewhere in June, July, August and September of 2023, when the Russians were repelling the Ukrainian greatest counter-offensive operation in the vicinity of the villages like Rabotina and Verbova and on the Vremivka tactical bridgehead. If you remember, the Russians destroyed significant number of Ukrainian armored vehicles, tanks, mainly of the Western production. And now the Russians start using this type of weapon, this type of machine massively once again, and now they're using them on Kupiansk direction, which confirms that the Russians have some certain plans and goals to destroy as many as possible Ukrainian armored vehicles on this direction. And to tell the truth, we start receiving the first updates of Russian massive attacks, and we will move there in a minute. Furthermore, we got another geolocated video to the west of Orlyanka. On this video, we can see how the Russian FPV drone operators were attacking the Ukrainian positions in this area, which confirmed that this tree line is under complete Ukrainian control. We're using this video just to clarify and to understand and to adjust the map to show the Ukrainian edge positions. Now we are moving to the most important and interesting part of the Kupiansk direction, to the village by the name of Krakhmalnaya. The Ministry of Defense of Russian Federation reported that today, as a result of fierce clashes, the Russians managed to establish control over this territory, and this village is currently under complete Russian control. And this is very important. During the previous days we were talking a lot about the Russian attacks. First we were talking that the Russians established fire control over the road N26, and the Russians managed by that to cut the supply and support in this area. Then we were discussing the Ukrainian counter-offensive operation that took place somewhere in this area, but the Ukrainian counter-offensive operation was repelled by the Russian forces. The Ukrainians were defeated, and also the Russians attacked with Stos flamethrower systems the main Ukrainian supply road, and the Ukrainians having losses were forced to step back, so that attack was a failure. And after all those clashes, the settlements, the village became under Russian control. And today we got more details, more updates from this territory, and probably the most important updates are coming from the Russian military expert Rybar. He reported that the Russians didn't stop at Krakhmalnaya. After the Russians established control over the village, the Russians took a decision to continue further operation, and as a result of clashes, the Russians managed to improve their positions, to capture additional fields and tree lines around the village. And according to Rybar, the Russians currently entered the village by the name of Berestova, this one. So according to some Russian more or less reliable resources, the Russians, as a result of offensive operation, managed to break through significant territories and to enter Berestova from the north. And currently there are very heavy clashes on the outskirts of the village. For now we haven't received even a single geolocated confirmation of that, but very likely that something like this is happening because the distance between Krakhmalnaya and Berestova is very short. Furthermore, other Russian sources have updated their maps reliable, and they're also showing additional progress of the Russian forces. But the Russians are saying that, other sources are saying that there are clashes on the outskirts of Berestova, but not as a result of complete defeat of Ukrainians, but as a result of Ukrainian, let's say, regrouping. They took a decision to retreat, to withdraw their positions, and to enter the settlements. The Ukrainians took a decision not to fight along the fields during the winter period of time. They took a decision to protect and to defend themselves inside of the villages, cities, and so let's say inside of the buildings and let's say residential areas. And now, if you remember yesterday, we discussed these operations and we made such a projection that probably the Russians will attack Berestova. And obviously, this is not the only direction the Russians are going to attack the village. Obviously, within the next 48 hours, we need to expect some activation of Russian offensive operation from Novoselovskaya. Obviously, the Russians will try to attack Berestova from many directions, at least from 3. And now, the most important question we might have, so what is the purpose of the Russians? Why the Russians are attacking? There might be lots of explanations of that attack. The simplest explanation is that the Russians are trying to attack exactly in the direction where they can to develop and to penetrate the Ukrainian defense belt. If let's say if the Russians manage to break through the Ukrainians somewhere here, so that's why the Russians would continue attacks here. If the Russians were able to penetrate the Ukrainian defense belt, let's say in direction of Kolodizne, the Russians would continue attack there. So this is the simplest explanation why the Russians are involving more and more forces exactly in this direction. So this is a very simple explanation. The second explanation is that geographical and topographical one. First of all, just take a look at the cities and villages in this area. Most of the villages and cities of Ukrainian forces are located along Oskol River. So as you can see, significant number of villages located along the road R79. This is the road. There are Boguslavka, Kruglyakivka, Sinькова, Listina, Sinka, Barova, and every single village is located along the river. The second area of location of Ukrainian cities are located along N26 road. Kislovka, Kotляровка, Tabaevka, Berestova, Novoselovka, and then along Жеребец River. And there is a territory between these two lines, between N26 road and R79 roads. It's a fields and there are no villages. Very big gap, as you can see. Just one Lazova city to the south, but there is a very big gap between the cities. That means that there is a very big gap between Ukrainian positions. Furthermore, if let's say we calculate the distance between Krakhmalna to Oskol River, if we calculate the distance, we're gonna see that the distance is around 15 kilometers. It's a pretty big distance anyway, but we can say that the Russians have already established some fire control over this territory, and of course it would be much better if they can get as close as possible, because the closer the Russians to the Oskol River, the heavy losses the Ukrainians have. Now the situation in Oskol completely reminds us the situation along Жеребец River, but the only difference between Жеребец and Oskol, that when talking about Жеребец, there are a lot of roads, a lot of supply roads that Ukrainians can use to send reinforcements and reserves, let's say, from one side of Жеребец River to another. Well, at least there is a roads between Заречное, Tarskoye, Mirna, Yampolovka, then Ivanovka, Terny, Ivanovka, Novosадova. There are ways from Novolyubovka to Nevskaya and many other roads that Ukrainians can use. But when talking about Oskol River, there are not so many places where the Ukrainians can redeploy their forces from one side to another, and the main reason of that is the width of Oskol River. As you can see, this is a very wide river, and it's very unlikely the Ukrainians have possibilities to build such a big pontoon bridges, and if they start building such a bridge, of course the Russians would destroy it with some missile. So there are just few places where the Ukrainians can supply their forces from one side of Oskol to another. It's the area between Barova and Gorgovatka, the second area Sinькова, Kruglyakivka, and probably a few places in the vicinity of Kupinsk, because the river is less in this area, the width of the river is less, so that's why there are more possibilities to build bridges on something like this. So that's why, obviously, we understand that if the Russians continue their offensive operation, and if the Russians somehow are able to continue their offensive from Krakhmalna to Berestova, and somehow as a result of some unexpected offensive operation from any direction, if the Russians are able to establish control over the village, first of all, and the most important, the Russians will reduce the distance between Russian artillery positions, Russian edge positions, and Oskol River itself. For example, from these positions to Oskol River, the distance is around 12 kilometers. And of course, we understand that this is also might be very good and positive progress for the Russians, but this is not enough to establish complete control over the Oskol River, over the main supply roads for Ukrainian forces, and to split this territory in two parts. The Ukrainians still, even from this configuration, will be able to have possibilities to have this front line, Kupiansk-Liman, as one unit, not like two separate. And to complete the successful Russian operation, addition, of course, they need to establish control over additional villages like Tabaevka and of course Peshchane. So this is possible, this is must Russian additional progress if they want to split this territory in two parts, because the distance from Peshchane edge positions to Oskol River is less than 9 kilometers. So it's like a normal situation for artillery forces. And furthermore, if you take a look at this configuration of the front line, you're gonna understand that if the Ukrainians, let's say, want to repel Russian attack, there are not so many ways how to do this. The fields are mined, the weather might become very bad very soon. Basically, the villages like Tabaevka, Peshchane and Berestova are cut off from the mainland, and the logistic in this for this part of the front line is very poor. So we'll see what the Russians are able to do, but obviously after Krakhmalny, very likely they're gonna have a small operational pause, and after that they will continue offensive operation. Maybe the Russians have already brought significant number of reserves and there are going to be no operational pause, and they will continue, let's say, endless and unstoppable attacks, but this we're gonna see and understand tomorrow or the day after. But according to the Minister of Defense and the level of loss from the Ukrainian side, we see that after clashes, the level of losses has been reduced and now there might be some pause. Now we are moving to Liman direction. We have a lot of very interesting details and updates to a few very strong videos. This is the video how the Russian soldiers are moving to the fight, to the battle, to the storm. The Russian priest blessing Russian soldiers before the next storm somewhere in Kremenaya forest or maybe somewhere in the vicinity of Sinkovka. Significant number of Russian soldiers requiring some blessing of God before the clashes and before any operation on the ground. Very strong video showing us the real spirit of Russian soldiers. Now we are moving to Kremenaya forest. We have some additional updates from the Serebryanka forest. On this video we see how the Russians start bombing and attacking the Ukrainian forces and positions inside of the forest. After artillery preparation, the Russians started and launched operation on the ground, and as a result of clashes they captured additional territory in this forest. And basically this is the first geolocated video that show us the Russian progress on this territory, and now we have like the rights to adjust the map and at least to show this territory under complete Russian control. We will adjust the map before the next video. So basically, according to all these geolocations, we see that the Russians are moving something like this, and the main direction, the main Russian destination is Seversky Donets River, that located to the south, and when talking about villages, the global scope is to attack Grigorovka. Also, we have another video from Bilogorovka. From this territory, the Russians launched another offensive operation. All these geolocations about the Russian offensive operation, the Russians also were trying to attack the Ukrainian positions along Seversky Donets River, and the main purpose and the main Russian goal was to establish control over this territory, over this small, let's say, industrial maybe area, or maybe this is some camping, I don't know. So that was the main Russian purpose. First, the Ukrainians published the video how the Russians were demining this area using the distance method of demining, using the Ur-77 equipment. After demining, the Russians launched the ground operation. Once again, the video was published by the Ukrainian sources, by the Ukrainian forces. They published how the Russians were moving along the river, how they were attacking, but the video is very difficult. We will not watch the video because of casualties and losses among the Russian army. The Ukrainians sent significant number of FPV drones and the Baba Yaga drones, and they were bombing the Russians. So I don't know the results of that attack, and we understand that because of that fact that the video was published by the Ukrainians, very likely that it's like a part of some propaganda from Ukrainian side, so that's why we will not see any, let's say, achievements of progress of the Russians. But anyway, these are two offensive operations that the Russians were trying to implement in direction of Seversky Donets River and the main Ukrainian forces of 81st Air Mobile Brigade that located on the hill to the west of Bilogorovka. So the main Russian purpose was to attack here. One important note that I would like to remind you, because if you remember, maybe even in January we were talking that this area exactly, let's say, on to the north of 81st Brigade, somewhere along in the vicinity of Grigorovka, to the south of Russian progress here, there are positions of, if you remember, of women battalion. So there are around 40 women. That main purpose is maybe to defend this sector or maybe to defend this area. I don't remember for sure, but this is the area of responsibilities of Women Battalion. And as you can see, the Russians are pushing exactly in this direction, thinking that maybe this might be the weakest point of Ukrainian defense, and they think that they may penetrate this area easily. So very interesting. We'll see what is going to be next. Now we are moving to Bakhmut-Artyomov's direction. We have a lot of very interesting details and videos from this territory as well. The Ukrainian sources published the video how the Russians were attacking the Ukrainian forces along this tree line. Once again, the videos were published by the Ukrainian side. There are a lot of, let's say, not a lot of, but few destroyed or damaged Russian tanks or armored vehicles, some Russian soldiers who were retreating and withdrawing their positions. But we are using this video just with one purpose. Because of that fact that the Russians were attacking something like this, we have 100% confirmation that the Russians managed to establish control over this stronghold by the name of Topor, or in English X. So these territories under Russian control, the 215.7 hill under Russian control, very likely the territory between these two hills, between these two strongholds, also under Russian control. For now we don't have any geolocations, so that's why we're not going to adjust the map, but very likely we're going to receive some. Furthermore, the Russians were storming this area and the Ukrainians were trying to repel the Russian attacks. And I'll remind you one thing. Just yesterday we were talking that a little bit to the southwest from the Russian main attack, in these strongholds, a concentration of strongholds, we got the video. The Russians at least are saying, the author of this video told us that the Ukrainians, after the Russians start bombing them and after very heavy artillery preparation and FPV drone strikes, took a decision to retreat, to drop their positions and to run away. And after that case, very likely the Russians launched their offensive operation because they saw that Ukrainians left this territory. To stabilize the situation, the Ukrainians start sending significant number of reinforcements and reserves like tanks, armored vehicles from Chasov Yar, but the problem is that to counterattack the Russians, the Ukrainians were forced to cross canal, and there are not so many places that Ukrainians can use for these purposes. Every single cross in canal, let's say road on above canal, was under complete Russian control, and just during that, let's say, reinforcements, the Ukrainians lost significant number of tanks. At least on this video we see one tank was damaged and destroyed of Ukraine army with FPV drone strike. Another tank was destroyed a little bit to the south from Ivanovska, that also was sent to stabilize the front line in the vicinity of 215.7 hill. So the situation, as you can see, went wrong. Furthermore, the Russians destroyed another Ukraine air defense system, Strela 10, also somewhere to the south of Ivanovska, that Ukrainians were using maybe to suppress and destroy the Russian Arlan drones and many other types of drones. So we see the Ukrainians lost the battle for the southern part of Ivanovska. The Russians continue development of their positions here, and we understand that obviously the main target of the Russians is to connect these two strongholds. Maybe the Russians have already done this, and to establish control over these trenches and fortifications. If the Russians are able to do this, obviously they're gonna receive significantly powerful foothold on the south of Ivanovska, and after that the Russians can continue their offensive operation further in direction to the west. The Russians can continue attacks to the north of Ivanovska, and of course the Russians can attack the Klishchiivka from behind and the most powerful stronghold to the west of the village. Furthermore, we got details and updates from Andreevka area. We will not watch the video, but we have another geolocated confirmation of Russian presence along the railways. The Russians managed to get this territory. There was a very fierce and heavy clashes between the Ukrainians and the Russians in this area, and as I understand, the Ukrainians were defeated and were forced to step back. So as you can see, the Russians continue the process of restoring of their positions along the railways, and for now we don't have any geolocations exactly from this territory, but as I understand, maybe if the Ukrainians are still there, but the days of this foothold for the Ukrainians are numbered. The Ukrainians are stepping back, they're withdrawing their positions, and they're moving further to the north in direction of Canal, of course, and in direction of Klishchiivka, western part of Klishchiivka, and the stronghold that located behind Klishchiivka, this one, with the purpose to shorten the front line and to slow down the Russians and their progress in the vicinity of Ivanovska. We haven't received anything from Bogdanovka. So that's why we will continue further in direction of Konstantinovka. Furthermore, we got very interesting details that the Russians attacked the city. The sources are saying that they managed to discover the Ukrainian concentration of forces, and they also attacked them. Probably that was like, as you can see, all these events took place at the same time. The Russian attack in Ivanovska, the Ukrainian redeployment of forces, destroyed of tanks along canal, attack against Ukrainian positions in Konstantinovka. So this is like the story of one battle where the Russians tried to control the supply roads and control the everything that happens in this area. We got also some videos from New York, from Novgorodsk. According to the Russian language, another temporary position of Ukrainian forces was destroyed as a result of FAB strike. Now we are moving to Donetsk-Avdiivka area. We have a lot of very interesting details and updates from this territory as well. Most of them we have already discussed in the previous updates. To tell the truth, yes, we haven't received nothing. I haven't received anything new. We have from the previous update the geolocated confirmation of Russian presence on Saborная Street that was published by the Ukrainians. We have already discussed the Ukraine FPV drone strike, FPV drone bombing from Baba Yaga drone against the Russian edge forces. This video was geolocated either by the Russians and by the Russian and Ukrainian sources. So this is 100% confirmation of Russian control over this territory. We have different mappers showing different progress of the Russian side. Now most of the territory is covered with the gray zone. It's very difficult to understand where exactly the Russians are moving. But anyway, today, according to some Russian sources, the Russians launched another storming, another assault. For now, we still haven't received any updates of the results. Maybe there was just like artillery attacks against the Ukrainian forces who were trying to counterattack. But let's wait a little bit. We need more details. About northern flank, there are no changes either. The Russians, according to the mappers, established and moved closer to the main Ukrainian stronghold on the eastern part. The Russians were bombing the Ukrainian forces and positions with FABs, the forces that Ukrainians were trying to send to stabilize the area, but everything let's say events, these things didn't help the Ukrainians to stabilize area. And probably the most important thing is that the Ukrainians themselves are saying that the situation of Avdiivka is critical and that the Russians and that the Russian special forces can walk through Avdiivka as if they are walking somewhere in Donetsk. So no barriers, no resistance from the Ukrainian side. One have a feeling that the completely Avdiivka collapsed, and the only thing the Ukrainians do right now is they're trying to find a solution how to retreat, how to save their lives, and how to move as far as possible from the southern direction, as close as possible to the chemical plant and to the northern flank of this territory. What else about Donetsk? We have very, let's say, I don't know, terrible and difficult updates from Donetsk itself. Today, the Ukrainian sources, the Ukrainian forces attack the residential area on the western part of Donetsk. As you can see, there are buildings, residential area, there is a marketplace, there is a mall, there were a lot of people here, and the Ukrainians attacked this territory during the daylight, it's Sunday, it's like Sunday day, when people were moving to shop, to make some shopping, to buy some products, to go to church. And this territory, when there was a significant number of people, was attacked by the Ukrainians with multi-launch rocket system with cluster rounds. As a result of those attacks, Donetsk lost around 25 soldiers and 20 were wounded. For now, as I understand, the numbers haven't changed, but this is like, according to the Russians, this is something like reply of the Ukrainian artillery forces as an act of revenge for the Ukrainian failure in Avdiivka direction. So something like this. Anyway, this is the terrible situation. As I understand, the Russians are planning to make special council of the security organization to discuss this attack again with cluster rounds of the residential area, because the Donetsk was attacked by the Western weapon. The Russians from their side attacked and bombed Ukrainian positions in Pokrovsk, the main logistic of Ukrainian forces. So this is the, let's say, another temporary position of Ukrainian forces, and at least that's what left from the temporary positions. And the Russians attacked Selidova. These two cities, like Selidova and Pokrovsk, currently are the main logistic hub for the Ukrainians, that Ukrainians used to redeploy forces as close as possible to the combat line. And both cities were under very heavy fire. We see the fire, we see the results of destruction, and so on. Another important update about the entire situation: as you know, the Ukrainians have very big problems with supply and support from the Western countries. For example, today even Joe Biden told, and he's saying this every day, that if Western countries, if United States of America don't give help to Ukraine, then Russia will continue and Russia will break Ukraine. Russia will do whatever they like with Balkan states, with Baltic states, with Poland, with Hungary. So the situation is critical with supply. But when talking about Russia, every single day we're receiving more and more geolocated videos of more and more and additional armored vehicles and tanks that are coming to the combat line. Today there was a very interesting video. As you can see, we see significant number of trucks and machines that brings to the combat line the pontoon bridges. So these are engineering equipment, the main purpose of to create bridges. Very difficult to understand where exactly the Russians are planning to bridge, what kind of rivers they are trying to cross. But anyway, we see that this traffic is endless. Furthermore, we continue receiving almost every single videos of more and more updates from Chechnya, from Grozny. For example, today we got another video how another battalion of Chechensky Spetsnaz completed their trainings and was sent to the combat line somewhere in the territory of the special military operation. So as you can see, very strong guys, fully equipped, fully trained on the contracts, were sent today to the special military operation to fight somewhere, maybe in Kupiansk direction, maybe in the South Donetsk direction or something else. If we increase the numbers of this since the beginning of this year of 2024, we got a lot of updates. For example, we have the video how the Russians, another batch of forces finished the trainings. This video we saw just yesterday, on the 20th of January, and then this batch of the forces was sent to Ukraine. We have today another reinforcement, so every single day another battalion is sent to the territory of Ukraine. On this video we see significant number of forces with Scott Ritter. Probably he was shocked, maybe when he saw this number of forces that even have this square hasn't managed to collect. He was shocked, and maybe he went to Biden and told him that, Joe, we don't have any chances to win Russia with such a big army they have. And now we're going back to the territory and the ground, and we continue with the South Donetsk direction. We haven't received anything from Novomikhailivka, just small updates about the Russian progress in the northeastern part of Georgievka. We got another, let's say, update of the map without any geolocations, but for sure we're going to receive them. And we have the intensifying of activity of the Russian forces in the vicinity of Urozhaine. The Russians continue their offensive operation. Today the Russians published a series of FPV drone strikes against the Ukrainian forces along the tree lines and in Urozhaine itself. So as we know, this is like the pattern. This is the first stage of offensive operation, of the ground operation. We need to wait the ground operation very soon on this direction. Of course, the main purpose of the Russians during the next possible attacks is to increase their foothold along the tree lines and to make something like half encirclement of Urozhaine, and after that to establish control over at least the southern part. And after that, the Russians will have possibilities to launch the ground operation, and they will start movements from the south in direction of Velika Novoselovka. And very likely this is going to happen very soon. On Robotyne area, we got more and more updates how the Russians are bombing and attacking Robotyne with multi-launch rocket systems, with stealth flamethrower systems. The city is under very heavy fire, and this is probably the first week of very heavy clashes inside of the village. Yet the Russians haven't started the ground operation, but we all understand that maybe 1 week, maybe another week, and maybe on the third week the Russians will start clashes inside of the village, and very likely the Ukrainians will just basically drop their positions and retreat, because as I see, less and less Ukrainians see the reason and lose understanding of the purposes of this war without supply, without support, without anything. Because, for example, we see the problems of the Ukrainians on the ground, and Zelensky today told us that he doesn't see any need to mobilize additional 5,000 people, and he explained this because the Western countries doesn't give him money. So to mobilize another 500,000 army, you need to pay them salaries, and this is a lot of money. And if you want to pay them salaries, the Ukrainian budget can't afford to pay and to support 500,000 army. Obviously, he was talking about this way to let's say to blackmail Europe and United States of America, saying, you want me to mobilize. I don't need mobilization. My economy can't afford this mobilization. If you want me to mobilize, you see the problem in Avdiivka, you see the problems in Kupin's direction, and all these problems just because of one thing: we don't have army, we don't have reserves, we have a lot of wounded people, we need to pay a lot of salaries. And if you want me to mobilize, you need to give me hundreds of trillions of billions of gold, and you need to give me moon, I don't know, something like this, and then I will mobilize another 500,000 soldiers. So that was another blackmail from Zelensky of Western countries. Western countries see that Ukrainians have problems in Kupiansk, in Avdiivka, and Zelensky stopped mobilization, adoption of mobilization process personally by himself. He needs money. He needs hundreds of billions of dollars if Western countries want to continue clashes with Russia. And as I understand, he will receive them. But who will pay? I don't know, because Joe Biden can't do anything with the Congress. Maybe European countries can do this, but Germany, maybe France, I don't know, maybe all together. But I don't see, let's say this is not like a process that today you take a decision, tomorrow Ukraine get money. It's, if when talking about Western countries, it's always very long. You need months sometimes to adopt another military aid, not like tomorrow. So very complicated, very difficult situation for the Ukrainians. When talking about Krinky, we haven't received almost anything from this area. Just one important note: few geolocations. After the updates about complete defeat of Ukrainians in this area, the level of activity and the level of geolocations reduced till minimal. The only thing we have is that, according to some more or less reliable sources, the Ukrainians have around 50 soldiers in Krinky. 35 of them are wounded, and just 15 are wounded from those 50, and just 35 can continue, let's say, clashes. But we got this update this morning. Probably during the day they are more lost wounded become. And that's it for this video. Military Summer channel reminds to condemn any violence in the world. Thank you for watching. Subscribe to my channel, put your likes, join my Patreon, and have a good day. Bye bye.